everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a new Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions that are often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we explore complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, and I'm joined by some amazing community members, some of them builders, some of them 2021 fellows, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our conversation today. We're going to be talking about wealth, and so we start off with a word association. Everyone's going to pick 1 to 3 words that they associate with wealth, and then as they do that, they will explain those words and give us a quick introduction. And also, if we could do it in the order of those, that would be great as well. So Jordan, you can go ahead and get us started.
Okay, so my name is Jordan Rodriguez. I'm a high school senior from Arizona, and something that I associate with wealth, like right off the bat, is excess. I think that in the way that our society is currently structured, it's kind of impossible to avoid the fact that some people being able to hoard such immense wealth ultimately means that other people don't have what they need. Like the wealth of the billionaires of our time is what defines the poverty of those that have the least. We have unprecedented levels of wealth inequality that haven't been seen since the days of monarchy, and this is unquestionably a harm to our society because we're unable to address some of the most pressing issues, including things like climate change, when the power of society is held by a few select people that have different interests than the vast majority of the people. So the wealthy people have not only different interests, but disproportionate influence over politics and other aspects of society, such as culture. So I think that when we discuss wealth, we'd be remiss not to acknowledge the problem that wealth faces to our society and those that don't possess it.
Well said. For this section, why don't we keep it like just short explanations for the words, and then we'll get into the meatier discussion after.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a junior from San Antonio, and when I think of wealth, I think of taxes because that's a really big discussion going on right now. Should the rich pay more taxes?
Hi, I'm Brycelyn. I am a high school freshman from Florida. And when I think of wealth, kind of the first word that comes to my brain is capitalism, because that is kind of the system in which our country is run, and a really big issue is like what to do with the wealth that other people have. So that's the first word that comes to my brain.
I'm Sara. I'm a junior from Maine, and I think of responsibility because there are like a few people that do have the most money, and it's kind of up to them to decide and kind of like show people what they want to do with that money.
Is Sally here?
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm Kasey, and I'm a sophomore in high school, and I'm from Maine. And probably the first word that like comes to mind when I think of wealth is probably greed, because a lot of the things in our time is mostly people thinking about themselves instead of others, which is one of the problems that we have.
Oh God, my bad. I'll like deviate a little bit to health and well-being, because an older definition of the word was more related to health, but also it's still related to health because disproportionate access to medical care.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going to go a few different directions here. So I'm going to say uncertain. I'm going to steal responsibility from Sara. And then I'm also going to put necessary because, I mean, those two words, the second and third one, explain why I'm uncertain about it because, like Sara mentioned, I think wealthy people do have a responsibility because no one is necessarily self-made. And I know that there are a lot of wealthy people who do choose to, well, okay, I don't know. I'm still so uncertain about this. And again, like, I don't know. I'm just excited to learn more during this conversation and to think more about this topic.
I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old and living in Pennsylvania. I would say the first word that comes to mind, it honestly was health and well-being. So I'm going to go a different route now.
Wait, really?
And I'm going to, huh?
Wow.
Yeah, you stole my words. I would say possessions is what I think of. And you can take that a lot of ways, like in money or figuratively too. So that's where that comes to mind.
All right, now if anyone has a question or provocation they want to pose, we can go ahead and get started.
I don't want to do like another word association, but when you think of like wealthy people and like upper class people, what do you tend to think of? Like, do you think you have a specific perception of like them in like a way that they're going to be or treat you? Or do you kind of think that like they're also people and they can be like different from each other? Like, how do you guys feel about that?
It's a great question.
Well, I know when I think of like money, what comes to mind is kind of like old money versus like new money. Kind of like you have like the Rockefellers who have just kind of like since the beginning of this country, they've had money. And then I think of like new money where like people have like worked really hard to like get it. Not that they haven't worked really hard to get it, but like for a long period of time, they have had money. And I haven't really thought of like how they would like, I don't know how I want to phrase it. Because like you kind of like the first thing that comes to mind is like the business mogul or like politicians, and there's just a lot of like different things. Because I feel like personally, when I think of like wealthy, I kind of think I almost go straight to like politics and kind of like almost like dirty money, like paying people off, like that kind of stuff. But then I'm also kind of thinking of like the people who worked really hard to get their money and are like doing positive things with it. That's, yeah.
Madison, do you want to add that last part about, on the other hand, positive people, like positive use of money as well? Anyone else?
I think growing up, just like in movies and such, like the first thing you think of is just like the suit and tie events, like the big party gathering type things.
Like Great Gatsby?
Yeah, that's an easy way to put it.
Yeah, I think something that's important to note is that once people reach a certain level of wealth, they're essentially entirely disconnected from the struggles of ordinary people. They never really have to consider what the implications might be of healthcare policy, or whether they'll be able to feed their family, or what might happen to their job. They have none of these normal material concerns that affect most people. And so I think that there's a certain level of distance socially between the wealthy and the rest of the population that can be a gulf that's difficult to cross culturally and socially.
So I have to admit that the first time we launched the fellowship, I think partially the whole team, but I'll take responsibility because I was like mostly in charge of the tech, and we just didn't think about how few homes in a lot of areas have good internet. In a lot of areas, a lot of kids only have phones as well, or they don't have phones. And so a question, so totally, I'm an example of someone that was disconnected. Now I'm becoming more connected. But another question to not go to immediately, why don't we just like put it down, is how do people of different, I don't know, it's too simplistic to say it's just linear, right? But how do people of different socioeconomic kind of classes start to understand each other better? But yeah, you can answer the when you think of wealthy people question. I just wanted to get this question down.
I think there's like really no other way to go about it except like making sure like you iterate points where again like you're putting yourself in people's shoes. Like I just think in like daily life examples. For example, like my last job, I can remember my mindset like in words, but like I can't exactly because I didn't love my last job. So for example, and like having moved on from that, like I can't fully grasp how I felt like I used to because I'm just like in a different chapter of my life now. So I think like for wealthy people, it's like you really have to, I don't really know how to word this, like be immersed in whether it's different organization initiatives or whatever it is to really see the day to day and like really almost experience someone else's day to day rather than your own, would be the best way to put it.
Get close to the action, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, I have a little bit of a different experience than most people because my dad is like a doctor, so like he is of the upper class, but then like my parents are divorced and I primarily live with my mom who is not of that socioeconomic class. So I feel like it's a little different because it's like I kind of live in both worlds. And I think that the main thing to keep in mind is just that like everybody's a human, and for the most part like nobody is really like trying to be malicious at heart and or anything. So it's like someone cannot really understand how privileged they are until like it's explained to them or like right in their face. So I think that the best thing that we can do is just try to communicate with each other and express things and promote empathy.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's important to promote empathy and to understand that people who are in a position of great wealth, they're generally just a product of circumstance, right? Like they were a product of certain privileges and a certain element of luck, certain element of talent or work. And that these people were merely just responding to the incentives of their environment. Like our society encourages and in fact demands the creation of particular wealthy people just because of the nature of accumulation of wealth. So it's important not to demonize wealthy people, but to instead understand the material implications of them existing and having the resources that they do.
Yeah. A related thought is that if you get overly emotional about it, you don't see the power dynamics clearly, right? And the wealth flows clearly, like, and then you become prone to conspiracy thinking as well.
Yeah, we've definitely seen this idea of like conspiratorial thinking towards the upper class. If you look at QAnon, at its core is this like nebulous idea of the coastal elite that doesn't understand the problems of the working people. And so a lot of people that have succumbed to this conspiracy theory are poor. They're the working poor, and they're vulnerable to this kind of conspiracy because of some of the resentment that they might feel towards people who have more than them, because they've been in a disprivileged position for their entire life, and the system is, in some senses, rigged against them.
Yeah, it's possible that they've never seen a wealthy person do something like visibly good for them. It probably has happened behind the scenes, right? But seeing is believing. Anyone have any question or provocation you want to pose?
So I know we've touched on like the idea of responsibility. So I just want to pose wealth and responsibility as a provocation.
It's a good one. Also want to, we will save this for later, but do you want to be wealthy?
Any thoughts on either of those?
Okay, so with wealth and responsibility, I think that this is like a broader point that applies to anybody that has some kind of privilege, and wealth is certainly like one of the biggest privileges you can have. You have a responsibility to use your privilege for good, to the greatest extent possible. And so I think that something we should certainly seek to normalize is like charity to a much greater extent than is currently normalized, because wealthy people generally, they have money to the extent that a substantial donation, like a substantial portion of their wealth, is not contributing meaningfully to their day-to-day existence. Like their cost of living isn't actually cutting significantly into the money that they have. And so encouraging socially through norms that they should donate the money that they're not using actively, essentially, which would be a great proportion, certainly much greater than is the standard today, can do great good for society if we focus that spending on the most effective causes.
The other day, like the whole college admissions scandal thing that happened a few years ago, and how like the one Full House star's daughter was involved. She went on to a talk show to make like her comeback, and like, which was talking about the whole situation, how it came about, and it was just like so crazy to see like how out of touch with reality she was. She was just like I just didn't know it was bad. People around me, their parents put all this money into colleges, like, you know, as donations. So then it's like they get into it, whatever. And like her family just did a different way of going about it. So she's like, to me, it's so normal. And like with everyone's backlash on the internet, I was just so taken back. And I was just like, what? Like, so it's just crazy that she kind of put the responsibility that like other people had to teach her that was a bad thing. Like people who that affects their like everyday lives, people who do these crazy things to get, not crazy in a good way, like the hard work that they put in to get into college and everything. And like she had to be explained that is like the normal way to go about things, because everyone around her that's not how they went about getting into these great colleges. So it was just crazy to see that the way she stated things, the responsibility was on everyday people to teach her that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of on like a similar point on like responsibilities of wealthy people versus like everyone else. It's like, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on everyone in our society and our economic system to be super responsible with your money, because that's just like how it works for the most part. Like you kind of like have to be ambitious and you have to pursue things. And I feel like it's definitely a really different world for those who are born into wealth and privilege and those who aren't, because in a sense, like people who are born into it almost have to have it taught to them, while everyone else I feel like kind of has to like pick it up as they go, because they don't have the privilege that wealthy people have to not have to worry about money. So I feel like in a sense, the way the family that you are born into or that you are raised in or whatever affects how responsible you will be with your economic status in the future.
You just made me realize that we really have to celebrate learning, progress, even if it's incremental, in learning how to be responsible. it goes along with Jordan's point about not demonizing people. Like, people are a product of their circumstances, and well, one thing is almost for sure: if you demonize them, they're going to want to do the opposite of what you tell them to do.
Right. And that's just like bringing it all back to like communicating with each other, because we are all born under, or not necessarily born, but we're all raised in such different circumstances. So it's like we can't really demonize any group of people or say that one group of people is like lesser in a certain sense than another, because we can't help our circumstances when we're being raised or born.
Ashley, do you have any thoughts on any of the questions so far?
Back to the last question, I was thinking about how not demonizing people, because usually people say like, if I was in this situation, I would do things completely differently. But in reality, you really don't know how you would react. So it's important to keep that into perspective and just like take it easy on them, I guess.
Yeah, and to build off of Ashley's point, this is why I think another thing that's important is to not put personal responsibility on wealthy people to be benevolent. I think that certain systems in our society should make it not depend on the individual morality of a particular wealthy person, and instead have like much harsher taxes to do wealth redistribution that can be very beneficial to society overall.
I definitely feel like there's a lot of pressure towards like people who are wealthier and people who grow up with not like having that experience and those kinds of like things that they have. And so I feel like people pressure you a lot if you grow up with these certain experiences and then not being able to have those experiences.
That's a great point.
I'm going to drop down to Gary's question of, do you want to be wealthy? So for me, I feel like obviously it would be nice to have a lot of money to like do a lot of things, but I feel like when it all comes down to it, all I really want is to be stable and to like not have to worry about it. But at the same time, I don't feel like I need to have like the excess of wealth that some people have, going back to like the word association at the beginning. I feel like I just want to be stable, and I know that I don't want to make any generalizations about wealthy people, because like I said, like it's a little different, but I feel like wealthy people can definitely have a tendency to get, how do I phrase this, to like get not less patient over time, but it can kind of like desensitize you when you are so used to having like that kind of like the privilege of having a ton of money or whatever. Like it's so easy to get desensitized to how other people might live. So I don't necessarily want to be wealthy because I don't want to risk that desensitization of like not understanding anymore, if that makes sense. So stability would be ideal for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that if I ever was in the position where I was wealthy, I wouldn't want to act like it. I wouldn't want to adopt a wealthy lifestyle. I would just like live as if I were just like stable financially. And because I feel like when you like embrace the way that like, oh, I have so much money, I could do like so many things, like that's when it can really like get to you and help like make you desensitized to other ways that people live.
Yeah, definitely. It's one thing that's very clear about the way that humans live is that they adapt to their level of material comfort fairly quickly. So whether you live a middle-class existence or something higher than that, or if you're incredibly wealthy, it won't make a very significant difference in your happiness, because you just adapt to whatever level of comfort you're at. So like ultimately, wealth above a certain level, which represents economic stability, like not having to worry about paying the bills or providing food for your family, which I think in the like basic research that they've done is somewhere around $40,000 a year. I don't think that's like really necessary for most people. So if I were to want to be wealthy, it would be because I think that it would make me a more effective advocate for what I want to do and the changes that I want to make in the world. So politicians often have to be very wealthy to be able to run a campaign, which is an unfortunate fact about society. So if I want to be a politician and be able to make change to our political system, it's possible that wealth is one of the only paths to that goal. And so essentially, wealthy people using their wealth right can be effective. So we do need some people aspiring to be wealthy in order to use that for good in the society that we live in.
I want to make sure everyone that wants to answer this question has the chance, but I want to just, Madison, can you write down, how do you make sure you don't get corrupted if you get wealthy? Because I'm sure a lot of really corrupt, wealthy people, when they were like kids, they were like, I'm going to be an exception. But what happened?
I think that goes back to like the point I made earlier. I was like just spewing out words, but immersing yourself at some degree, because like everyone is saying, like you can become desensitized so quickly because of these like different iterations of your life. Even just like in everyday life, you probably forget, you can't put yourself in your shoes from 5 years ago, like the exact feelings and everything that you felt. Like I eat up the show Undercover Boss, which is embarrassing, but I do watch that show. And like you just see in those situations too, like people doing those jobs for like whatever it is, a day or a week, like the CEO of companies, and then they like realize all the discrepancies and everything. It's very interesting to see that.
I feel like at the end of the day, it all comes back down to, again, like being able to recognize the privilege that you have. And that's kind of like something that's been kind of apparent more recently with like BLM and everything going on, because it's like, as a white person, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not racist. But then you learned about, well, I learned about being like actively anti-racist. So it's like, you can't just stop the effort at recognizing your privilege, but you have to do something about it and continue to speak up and help others. And I feel like, I mean, obviously there's a difference between socioeconomic status and like racism, because like there are different things that you can do. But I feel like at the end of the day, it comes down to recognizing your privilege and asking yourself how you can help others and how you are willing to help others.
That's great. Like, I imagine that if you don't have that reflective process about like how you can keep doing better and better, I think you just naturally like think that you're doing enough, or you don't even think about it. You don't do it much.
Yeah, I think this is like similar to what Julia was touching on, but I think it's like you have to make a choice early on to not completely immerse yourself in the lifestyle of a wealthy person. So it's like, yeah, if I have millions of dollars, I could buy 10 cars, but do I need 10 cars? No. So like just like making decisions like that don't get you like kind of like in like send like a chain reaction of other lifestyle choices that could like corrupt you.
On that note, I having gone to Duke, I met a lot of kids that did finance careers in New York City. I live in New York City. I've been here for 5 years, 5.5 years, and if you hang around people who are committed to keeping up a certain lifestyle, you literally cannot be their friend, at least like in an active way, if you don't keep up that same lifestyle. So I found that if I distance myself from people that really identify with their wealth, I feel less tempted to do the same.
Anyone who wants to like bounce back to this question can, but I would like to pose another question that you can just write down. And this question might be like a little bit loaded. So if it's like a little too like political or too loaded, you don't have to use it. But if you could change one thing about our current economic system in our country, what would you change?
Anyone have an answer to either of those?
Kasey, do you have anything?
I guess I'll answer the corrupt like that question, but I feel like if once you have that kind of wealth, you kind of get in like a zone where you're comfortable and like you stay in that comfortable bubble and you don't really like notice at first. And then like once you're around like people that like aren't as fortunate as you since you have like all this money and stuff, that you kind of know or realize that what you've been doing, like how sheltered you've been in, like how sheltered you've been from like the world and like not seeing everything that's like going on and what you could have been doing.
I think something about the question about corruption prompts us to step back for a moment, because if you live in a developed country and you have an income of about like $50,000 a year, you're in the global top 1%, which I think is somewhat sobering, because the majority of the world's people live in like abject poverty. Like this is just a fact about the world. Like there's enormous gulf in wealth and well-being between developed countries and developing countries, and that's because of like the history of colonialism and such. But I think that when we talk about like how to not get corrupted when you're wealthy, how to recognize your privilege, it's important to not talk about it as if it's a hypothetical happening to another person who might be wealthy. It's important to recognize that we probably experience a great degree of privilege just by virtue of where we live and where we happen to be born. And we should make sure to not take that for granted, even at that level of what we might consider wealth on the global scale. So to not be corrupted is to constantly be aware of the people who are suffering in much worse positions than you are, and to try to use your position to better those people's plight.
Yeah, we might already be corrupted. We probably are, and to a certain extent. How much do we talk about a lot of the just catastrophes happening around the world right now?
I'm gonna go ahead and answer my own question. I I feel like our entire system is very stacked in favor of certain groups of people. And I mean, there are a lot of different groups of people, like it's all over the place, because you have like rich versus not rich, or like, you know, like different races versus each other, you know, like even like different sexes. So I feel like if I could change something, it would be the division that we have between groups of people. And obviously like that's a lot of work to do, and that's not going to happen immediately, because it like the system kind of was built on those foundations. But I think that our entire country would run a lot more effectively, and everybody could tolerate each other much more if we were all on the same playing field.
That's a great one. Relatedly, I don't know if any of you know this, but do you know what like the concept of an accredited investor is? So in order to invest in like startups, like you have to have 500K in your bank account. So, you know, does that make sense, right? Like, do you have to be rich to be able to build the future? It's as simple as that. Like, there's like just it's literally institutionalized in our system that we don't think that poor people are smart enough to, or people that are less than 500K in wealth are smart enough to get ahead, like, and make smart decisions with their money. And I think that's just one example of how it's stacked against you.
Yeah, so like there's a bigger problem here because the disparity of wealth, it's self-perpetuating, and it also just detriments society overall. A lot of wealthy people tend to think in this mindset of not wanting to increase taxes because it would cut into whatever like big stack of resources they have in their bank account. But the reality is that we as a society gain when more people have access to the tools they need to innovate and bring their ideas to the forefront of the world. We're facing a lot of problems right now that if we had more of our country able to work on these problems, able to put their ideas forward, and were educated enough to be able to do that, and educated enough to start businesses and work on other forms of innovation, participate in democracy to a greater extent, everybody would benefit. It is truly a societal project to alleviate wealth disparity, because wealth disparity doesn't just hurt the poor, it hurts everybody. I don't think that it'll be possible to address many of the problems that we face without being able to use the resources of this vast swath of people that currently can't reach their full potential.
Any other thoughts on these two questions, or a question or provocation someone wants to pose? Okay, then, Gary, should we just move on to like the reflection next steps section, and maybe we could spend a little more time on there?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I'm gonna share this link with you all, and you can look over these notes. Gary, what did you want me to label this section again? I forgot.
Reflecting on the trek and charting next steps.
Okay. And so just shout out your reflections or next steps when you have them ready. I will say that like I had a lot of paradigm shifts during this conversation. Something that Jordan brought up was like really sobering, like the fact that we're talking about wealthy people, but like in the context of the rest of the world, we are wealthy people. And it makes me wonder the kinds of conversations they have about wealthy people, and they're talking about us and like wealthier nations. And so also, Jordan, what you said about how disparity harms society as a whole, because we're not able to tackle like a plethora of problems because there's this huge percentage of people who cannot, like, physically cannot reach their full potential with the cards that they've been dealt. And so yeah, it's definitely changed my perspective.
I think that one of the main things that I took away from it, well, a couple of the main things that I took away from it are how we are perceiving wealthy people versus how we are perceiving ourselves, and how we can make the two one with communication. I feel like we kind of talked about that a lot, whether it be like putting ourselves in other shoes or like actually talking to someone in a socioeconomic group that is different from ours. I feel like we really emphasized the point of not looking at wealth as something that is controlled, even though technically like it could be, but just trying to look at each other as human beings as opposed to like a check number. I think that that was something we really hammered tonight, and that is something that I am happy to take away.
Love it, love it. Ashley, anything?
Yeah, something that Madison kind of touched on is how like we're rich to other people in the world, and then Jordan also talked about how we might be corrupt and we don't even know it. So I think a really good step would be to reflect on yourself and your privilege to see if you have anything, like if you have that privilege and if you can fix anything.
Yeah, I mean, something that I realized a couple of years ago, a few years ago, was that, and I was spending so much time thinking about like the world's problems, and I recognized like, wait, I like actually am one of the rare percentages of people that can actually do that. So if I'm like noticing these problems and like seeing opportunities to address them, and I don't, it's pretty fucked up. So I guess that's part of, why CU got created. Sara, anything?
Yeah, I was just kind of, I don't know much about this topic, which is kind of why I wanted to, like, after I learned about the last one, that I wanted to keep coming to these. And I just thought it was really interesting how, like, we are kind of like the top, personally, I like of the world, that like we are the rich people. And I just think, personally, for what I need to do is just like educate myself more, so that like even though I'm not like rich, like have a lot of money, like I do have that privilege and I can just educate myself better so I can like use that in a positive way to help others.
Madison, I'm realizing we can do the same thing we did for word association in the future. We can just put the names. So
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Kasey, anything?
I would definitely take away that being educated about like how you can use your time and use like the money and privilege that you have, if you do have it, to better society or better like your community. Because with the responsibilities that like you have, it would be like, I guess, like nice to see like a change in society from how it is now.
100%. Julia?
Yeah, I think just like echoing everyone's recent points, as well as I just thought the whole conversation that we were talking about, like empathy is the biggest way to approach the conversation on all ends of wealth, whether not wealthy or wealthy. But also, I think we're kind of struggling a bit with how to keep wealthy people responsible and what's the best way to approach that. So I think going forward, that's like a big conversation that we can continue and to try to tackle, and obviously incredibly important.
Jordan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just I think that in conclusion of all this, the most important thing to do going forward is to change the way that we socially perceive wealth. A lot of people aspire towards wealth, even if it's not something that would actually make a big change in their life. And so I think that this is kind of a toxic like cultural dynamic that we have, where people will spend their entire life aspiring towards something that they can't really achieve because of the structure of the system. Only so many people can be wealthy. And so we should try to lean away from a culture that fetishizes wealth and prioritize addressing the real problems that come alongside of it.
I have to say, I mean, this is a self-selected group among a self-selected group, but this conversation was gave me a lot of hope, because I think the way that all of you see wealth is really mature and not like hyper like ideological in a way that is kind of self-defeating, really. I think that's really important, because we do have a lot of wealthy supporters, where we will over time we will only have supporters of all kinds, like wealthy and not wealthy. And so how do we treat them? I think we need to do better than just viewing people as digits. Well, cool. Madison, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I like what you just said there about not treating people as digits, because like I feel like people like on both ends of the spectrum, so like really wealthy people and really poor people, tend to be reduced down to like their wealth, but the people in the middle get kind of like the luxury of being seen for who they are. And so I think that that's really interesting as well, just to like change it across the spectrum. Like no matter what, you should be seen for like who you are as a person, and also something that Jordan touched on, just like about people striving to be wealthy. I'm realizing that like all the conversations like in elementary school, when it's like, what do you want to be? Kids either say that they want to, okay, like a lot of people tend to say like they either want to be rich, or they like find a profession that they know pays a lot, and they're like, I want to be that because I get paid a lot. And so it's crazy to think about like just like the mental models that people adopt from such a young age around wealth, and how it's something that like a lot of people are just like constantly striving towards. And when in the end, obviously I can't speak because I'm not super rich, but it's not fulfilling, from what I can tell. So those would just be my final thoughts.
It's so funny that you said that about like kids picking what they want to be when they grow up, because when I was like maybe 6 years old, I was in like first or second grade, and I literally decided that I wanted to be a lawyer because I played the game of life and lawyers paid the second most behind doctor, and I knew that I didn't want to be a doctor. So I said lawyer, and it's kind of funny because that was like where it started, but then over the years I discovered that I had a passion for like justice and like equality. So now at this point in my life, I want to be a civil rights attorney, because I can then go about promoting like equality and like creating justice from a law standpoint. But it's so funny that you said that, because like the way that my obsession with being a lawyer started was because like I knew that it paid a lot, and that just goes to show like how our society is.
You like Bryan Stevenson?
Yes, I read Just Mercy. Yeah, I read it. It was great. I loved it.
Yeah. We have a connection to him, not like through someone that we know. If there's a good reason to be connected with him, we might be able to make something happen. Just throwing that out there. But yeah.
Noted.
Yeah. Anyways, for any of the people that this is their first round of the trek, any thoughts? I think it was Kasey and Ashley.
I really liked it. I liked learning about other people's opinions and just seeing how they viewed certain like topics. And it was really like educational and nice to like hear other people.
I think the word association was really good to start off with because it kind of gets your thoughts in order. Because I know when I heard wealth, I was thinking all these things, but the word association kind of led me in a better path, more direct path for my thoughts.
This was my first Shrek as well. I really enjoyed the conversation. Looking back at some of the other topics here on the list, I'm somewhat disappointed that my first one was like somewhat negative, or at least it involved a lot of negative elements, considering our society. But I'm glad that I was able to share in your guys' insight.
All right, that was awesome. Let me stop sharing. All right, thank you so much for coming through. We're gonna have 2 to 3 of these every week, we think. It's kind of an evolving thing. So please come back and we'll talk about more really interesting topics. I don't know if I've had like a conversation about wealth this deep with anyone really. So it's not just like Gen Z that is getting that like needs to have like these kind of conversations. This is kind of missing everywhere. In fact, as soon as next week, we're gonna bring back more of our friends who are like of older generations, and I'm keen on bringing in one of our advisors who's like 70 something to see how that goes. I think it'll be fun to mix it up. All right, Madison, thank you so much again for directing us. Have a great weekend, everyone.